The dusty streets of Marfa, Texas had never seen anyone quite like Josephine Ellis when she stepped off the stagecoach in the summer of 1882. Her worn leather bag clutched in both hands and her dark hair already escaping its pins from the long journey across the desert. She had come from Philadelphia with nothing but her nursing training, a few dollars sewn into the lining of her skirt, and the desperate hope that the West might offer her a fresh start after scandal had destroyed her reputation back east through no fault of her own. The town stretched before her like a mirage in the afternoon heat, adobe buildings baking under the relentless sun, and she felt her heart sink at the realization that this remote settlement might be even more unforgiving than the society she had fled. Josephine made her way to the only hotel in town, a two-story structure that leaned slightly to one side as if exhausted by the weight of too many hard years. The proprietor, a weathered woman named Mrs. Chen, whose family had come to build the railroads and stayed when the work dried up, looked her over with shrewd but not unkind eyes. "You are the nurse they wrote about." "I am," Josephine replied, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "Is there much call for nursing here, Mrs.?" Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honey, out here people get sick, get hurt, and mostly just die without anyone knowing what to do about it. If you can actually help folks, you will have more work than you can handle." She pushed a register across the scarred wooden counter. "Sign here. Room is $3 a week, meals included if you take them before 7 in the morning and after 6 at night." The first week passed in a blur of small emergencies. A child with fever, a ranch hand with a broken arm, a woman whose difficult pregnancy had confined her to bed. Josephine moved through Marfa with quiet efficiency, her hands steady and her manner calm even when the situations were dire. People began to trust her, to seek her out, to whisper that maybe God had sent them an angel after all. It was on a scorching afternoon 2 weeks after her arrival that a young cowboy burst through the door of the small room she had rented to use as a clinic. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of desert sage. Dust covered him from his hat to his boots, and his chest heaved with exertion. "Are you Miss Ellis, the nurse?" "I am." Josephine was already reaching for her medical bag, recognizing the panic in his voice. "What has happened, my mother? She is burning up with fever and nothing we do helps." "Please, you have to come. Our ranch is about 5 miles out and I have a horse for you." His words tumbled over each other in his urgency, and Josephine noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he gestured toward the door. "Let me get my things." She grabbed her bag and a canteen of water, following him outside where 2 horses waited, their flanks dark with sweat. The cowboy helped her mount with surprising gentleness given his obvious distress, and then they were riding hard across the desert scrubland, the afternoon sun beating down on them without mercy. The ranch house appeared on the horizon after what felt like an eternity, a sturdy structure of wood and stone surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. The cowboy practically leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped, and Josephine followed more carefully, her legs unsteady after the wild ride. "This way," he said, leading her inside where the air was marginally cooler and smelled of sickness and fear. The woman lying in the bed was in her early 50s, her face flushed with fever and her breathing labored. Josephine set down her bag and immediately began her examination, feeling the racing pulse, the burning skin, the tight abdomen that spoke of something serious happening inside. "How long has she been like this?" "3 days." The cowboy stood in the doorway, his hat crushed between his hands. "First she said her stomach hurt, then the fever came on. She has not been able to keep anything down since yesterday morning." Josephine worked quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. The symptoms pointed to a serious infection, possibly appendicitis or something similar. Out here, without a proper hospital or surgical facilities, the prognosis was grim. But she had not come all this way to give up easily. "I need clean water, lots of it, and clean linens. Do you have ice?" "Ice?" The cowboy looked bewildered. "Never mind. Just bring me what I asked for, and then I need you to ride back to town. There is a doctor who comes through Marfa once a month. Find out when he is due next." She was already preparing a cool compress for the woman's forehead, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I cannot leave her." The words came out rough with emotion. Josephine looked up at him then, really seeing him for the first time. His face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, and she recognized the look of someone facing the possible loss of everything that mattered. "What is your name?" "Owen Anderson." He said it quietly, as if speaking too loudly might wake his mother to more suffering. "Owen, I am going to do everything I can for your mother. But right now, I need supplies and information. Trust me to care for her while you are gone." Josephine kept her voice steady and confident, even though inside she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest. He stared at her for a long moment and then nodded once, sharply. "Her name is Ruth. Ruth Anderson. She is all I have in this world." Then he was gone, his boots pounding across the floor and out into the brutal afternoon. Josephine turned her full attention to Ruth Anderson, stripping away the sweat-soaked bedding and beginning the careful work of trying to bring down the fever. She had seen cases like this before, back in Philadelphia's charity hospital where she had trained. Sometimes the patients recovered. More often, they did not. But she had learned that steady hands and refusing to give up could sometimes tip the balance when it seemed impossible. The hours blurred together as Josephine worked. She bathed Ruth's burning skin with cool water, coaxed drops of liquid between her cracked lips, monitored every change in breathing and pulse. When night fell, she lit lamps and kept working. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she forced herself to stay alert. This was what she had trained for, what she had crossed half a country to be able to do without shame or judgment hanging over her head. Owen returned near midnight with supplies and grim news. "The doctor was through here last week. He will not be back for 3 more weeks at least. Then we manage on our own." Josephine accepted the clean linens and the packets of herbs she had requested. "Your mother is very ill, Owen. I need you to understand that. But she is also strong and she is fighting. We are going to fight with her." He nodded, his face haggard in the lamplight. "Tell me what to do." They worked together through that long night, Owen following Josephine's instructions with quiet competence. She learned that he was 24 years old, that his father had died 5 years ago, leaving him to run the ranch alone with his mother's help, that Ruth Anderson was beloved by everyone who knew her for her kindness and her determination. As dawn painted the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, Ruth's fever finally began to break. "Is she going to be all right?" Owen's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and hope. "She is not out of danger yet," Josephine cautioned, but she allowed herself a small smile. "But this is a good sign. A very good sign." The crisis had passed, but Ruth's recovery would be long and difficult. Josephine made the decision that she could not abandon her patient now, and Owen did not even question it when she announced she would be staying at the ranch until Ruth was well again. He cleared out a small room that had once belonged to his father's foreman, and Josephine moved her few possessions from the hotel in town. The days took on a rhythm. Josephine tended to Ruth with unwavering dedication, monitoring her progress, adjusting her care as needed, slowly coaxing her patient back toward health. Ruth was indeed strong, with a will to live that seemed to burn as fiercely as the Texas sun. As she regained consciousness and lucidity, Josephine found herself genuinely liking this weathered ranch woman who spoke bluntly and laughed easily, despite her weakness. "You saved my life," Ruth said one afternoon about a week into Josephine's stay, her voice still thin but growing stronger each day. "I did what I was trained to do." Josephine was changing the bandages on the poultices she had been applying to help draw out the infection. "No." Ruth caught her hand with surprising strength. "You did more than that. Owen told me how you stayed up for 2 days straight, how you refused to give up even when it looked hopeless. Why would you do that for a stranger?" Josephine met her eyes and saw genuine curiosity there, not suspicion or judgment. "Because every life matters. Because I took an oath to care for the sick. Because—" She paused, surprised by the emotion that welled up in her throat. "Because I needed to believe that I could still make a difference in this world." Ruth studied her face for a long moment. "You are running from something." It was not a question. Josephine considered lying, but something about this woman made her want to tell the truth. "I was engaged to be married back in Philadelphia. A doctor I worked with at the hospital. I thought he loved me, but he was only interested in my family's social connections. When my father's business failed and we lost everything, he broke off the engagement and spread lies about me to protect his own reputation. No hospital would hire me after that. Everyone believed him because he was a man and a doctor, and I was just a woman who had gotten above her station by wanting to practice medicine. So you came west." Ruth squeezed her hand gently. "Smart girl. Nothing wrong with starting over where people judge you by what you do, not who your family was. I hope you are right." Josephine blinked back unexpected tears. She had not spoken about this to anyone since leaving Philadelphia, had locked it all away inside where it could not hurt her. But Ruth's matter-of-fact acceptance somehow made it easier to bear. Over the following weeks, as Ruth grew stronger, Josephine also grew closer to both mother and son. She learned that the ranch was struggling, that cattle prices had fallen and drought threatened their water sources, that Owen worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep everything running. She saw the way he cared for his mother with rough tenderness, the way he handled the horses with patience, the way he treated his few ranch hands with respect regardless of whether they were white, Mexican, or formerly enslaved men who had drifted west seeking freedom. Owen, for his part, found himself watching Josephine with growing fascination. She was unlike any woman he had known. She spoke her mind plainly. She worked without complaint even when the heat was oppressive. She showed no fear of blood or illness or the harsh realities of frontier life. Her hands were always busy, always healing, always gentle. When she smiled, which was rare, it transformed her entire face from merely pretty to something that made his chest feel tight. But he also saw the sadness she carried, the way she sometimes stared out at the endless desert as if searching for something she had lost. He wanted to ask her about it, to understand what had put that shadow in her eyes, but he was not a man comfortable with words. So instead, he showed his gratitude in the ways he knew how, bringing her cool water when she had been working in the heat, fixing the door to her room that had stuck, making sure she ate proper meals even when she was too focused on his mother to think about herself. By the time August burned into September, Ruth was well enough to sit up for hours at a time, to take short walks around the house, to start reclaiming her place as the heart of the household. Josephine knew it was time to think about returning to town, about finding other patients who needed her care, about building the practice she had come to Texas to establish. "You should stay here," Ruth said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "We have plenty of room, and you could see patients here just as easily as in town." Maybe easier, since folks from the ranches would not have to make the long ride in. Josephine considered it. The offer was tempting. She had grown comfortable here, had come to think of the ranch as a place of safety, but she also knew the value of her independence, hard-won and precious. I appreciate the offer, but I need to stand on my own. I came west to build something for myself, not to depend on anyone else's charity. It would not be charity. Ruth's voice was quiet but firm. You saved my life, Josephine. You know what that means to me, to Owen. This ranch is all we have, and without me, Owen could not run it alone. We owe you everything. You owe me nothing but my fee, which Owen has already paid. Josephine kept her own voice gentle, not wanting to offend this woman she had come to care for deeply. You survived because you are strong and because you fought. I just helped. Ruth was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was something calculating in her tone that Josephine had not heard before. Owen needs a wife. The words hung in the air between them. Josephine felt her face flush hot, and she was grateful for the gathering darkness that might hide her reaction. That is not my concern. He is a good man, hard-working, honest kind. He would treat a wife well, provide for her, respect her. Ruth's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. And you are a good woman who deserves better than what you got back east. You could do worse than to consider him. Mrs. Anderson. Josephine stood up, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. I came here to be a nurse, not to find a husband. I have no interest in marriage, not after what I went through. I need you to understand that. I understand more than you think. Ruth looked up at her, and in the fading light her face was kind. But sometimes what we need is not what we think we want. Just think about it, that is all I ask. Josephine fled inside, her thoughts in turmoil. She had not allowed herself to think about Owen in those terms, had carefully kept her feelings locked down where they could not complicate things. But now that Ruth had spoken the words aloud, Josephine could not deny that something had shifted between her and the tall cowboy over these past weeks. She noticed the way his presence made her feel safe, the way his rare smiles made her pulse quicken, the way she found herself looking for him without meaning to. But marriage meant giving up her independence, her hard-won freedom, her dreams of building something of her own. Marriage meant trusting someone with power over her life and her future. And after what Charles had done to her back in Philadelphia, Josephine was not sure she could ever trust a man that way again. The next morning, Owen found her in the kitchen before dawn, preparing to make the ride back to Marfa. You are leaving. Your mother is well now. She does not need me anymore. Josephine kept her eyes on the supplies she was packing, not trusting herself to look at him. What if I need you? The words came out rough, unpolished, and Josephine's hands stilled. She forced herself to turn and face him. In the gray pre-dawn light, Owen looked younger than his 24 years, vulnerable in a way she had never seen him. Owen, you do not need me. You are perfectly capable of caring for your mother now. I have shown you what to watch for, what signs of trouble to look out for. You will be fine. That is not what I meant. He took a step closer, and Josephine could smell the scent of horses and leather and clean sweat that she had come to associate with him. Stay, please, not just as a nurse. Stay and let me take care of you for once, the way you have taken care of us. I cannot. The words hurt to say. I cannot be dependent on anyone's goodwill again. I need to make my own way. Owen's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would argue. Then he nodded slowly. I understand, but if you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me. Josephine rode back to Marfa as the sun climbed higher, and tried to ignore the ache in her chest that felt like leaving home. The next 3 weeks were busy ones. Word had spread about the miracle nurse who had saved Ruth Anderson's life, and suddenly, Josephine found herself with more patience than she could easily handle. She treated everything from snake bites to difficult births, from fevers to broken bones. Mrs. Chen at the hotel watched her come and go at all hours and shook her head in admiration. "You are going to work yourself to death, girl." "Better than dying of idleness," Josephine replied, but she knew there was truth in the older woman's words. She was working herself to exhaustion, taking every case that came her way, anything to keep herself too busy to think about the Anderson ranch and the people there. But she could not escape them entirely. Patients from the outlying ranches brought news. Ruth was doing well, they said. Owen was working harder than ever, they reported. The ranch was still struggling but holding on. Each piece of information made Josephine's resolution waver a little more. It was Ruth herself who finally came to town in early October, driving a wagon with Owen beside her. Josephine was treating a child's ear infection when they arrived, and her heart jumped into her throat at the sight of them. Ruth looked healthy and strong, nothing like the dying woman Josephine had first seen 3 months ago. Owen looked tired and grim. "We need to talk to you," Ruth announced without preamble once Josephine had finished with her patient. Privately. They went up to Josephine's small room at the hotel, and Ruth settled herself in the only chair while Owen stood by the window, his back to them. "I am dying," Ruth said flatly. "What? No, you are recovering well, I can see that." Josephine felt panic rise in her throat. Had she missed something? Had there been complications she had not anticipated? "Not from what I had before." Ruth's voice was calm, too calm. "I have cancer, Josephine, in my breast. I have known for over a year now. What you saw this summer, that infection, it was just one more thing on top of the real problem. I probably have 6 months left, maybe less." The room seemed to tilt around Josephine. "Have you seen a doctor? A real doctor? There might be treatments, surgery, something." "I saw a doctor in El Paso a year ago. He told me the truth, which I appreciated. It is too far advanced for surgery to help, and even if it was not, I could not afford it, and I would not spend the ranch's money on a lost cause anyway." Ruth leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I am not afraid of dying, Josephine, but I am terrified of leaving Owen alone." Josephine's gaze went to the man at the window. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. She could not see his face, but she could feel his anguish radiating across the small room. "He cannot run the ranch alone," Ruth continued relentlessly. "Not long term. He needs help, he needs a partner, he needs a wife. And before I die, I need to know that he will have someone who cares about him, someone who will not just be after the property or use him for what they can get. So you came here to ask me to marry him out of pity." Josephine felt anger flash through her, hot and sharp. "To sacrifice myself so you can die with a clear conscience." "No." Ruth's voice cracked for the first time. "I came to ask you to give him a chance, to give yourself a chance. I have watched you both these past months. I see the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I see the way you closed yourself off the moment I mentioned marriage. You are both so busy protecting yourselves from being hurt that you cannot see what is right in front of you." "And what is that?" Josephine's voice was barely a whisper. "A chance to build something real. Not marriage for convenience, not settling for less, but actually building a life with someone who could make you happy if you let them try." Ruth stood up, moving to where her son stood frozen by the window. She put her hand on his arm. "Tell her, Owen, tell her the truth." Owen turned slowly, and Josephine saw that his face was wet with tears he had not bothered to wipe away. "I am not good with words. I am just a cowboy who works with horses and cattle and does not know anything about courting a lady properly. But I know that since you came into our lives, everything has been different, brighter. Like there was a point to all the struggle. When you left, it felt like the sun went down and forgot to come back up." He crossed the room to stand in front of her, and Josephine found she could not look away from his eyes, desert sage and absolutely sincere. "I am not asking you to sacrifice anything. I am asking you to take a chance on something new. Marry me, not because my mother is dying and not because you owe us anything, but because maybe, just maybe, we could build something good together. You could keep being a nurse, keep helping people, keep being exactly who you are. I would never try to change you or control you or make you into something you are not. I just want the chance to stand beside you and see what we could build together." Josephine felt tears burning in her own eyes. "I am so afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid of trusting someone again. I am afraid of losing myself. I am afraid of being hurt. I know." Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and his grip was gentle. "I am afraid too, afraid you will say no, afraid I am not good enough for you. Afraid I cannot give you everything you deserve. But sometimes being afraid is not a good enough reason to walk away from something that could be wonderful." Ruth spoke quietly from behind her son. "I do not have much time left, and I am being selfish by wanting to see this settled before I go. But even if I was not sick, even if this was not urgent, I would still be here telling you both the same thing. Life is too short and too hard to spend it alone when you do not have to be." Josephine looked at Owen's hand holding hers, then up at his face, and then at Ruth standing behind him with hope and love in her eyes. She thought about the empty years stretching ahead of her if she said no, built around protecting herself from pain, but also from joy. She thought about the way Owen had never once made her feel less than equal, the way he had trusted her judgment and followed her instructions without question when his mother was dying. She thought about the ranch house where she had felt, for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, like she had found a place where she belonged. "I need time," she heard herself say. "I cannot make a decision like this under pressure, even if the reasons are good ones. Give me 2 weeks to think about it properly." She expected them to argue, to push, to try to pressure her into an immediate answer. Instead, Owen nodded slowly and released her hand. 2 weeks. That is fair. But Josephine, while you are thinking, I want you to know something. If you decide yes, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. And if you decide no, I will accept that and never bother you about it again. But I will also never stop being grateful that you saved my mother's life." They left then, mother and son, and Josephine sank down onto her bed with her head in her hands. Her mind was spinning, her heart was pounding, and she had no idea what she was going to do. The next 2 weeks were torture. Josephine threw herself into her work, trying to exhaust herself too much to think. But late at night, alone in her room, she could not escape the questions that haunted her. Could she really trust Owen? Could she risk her heart again? And if Ruth was truly dying, was it fair to marry Owen when part of the motivation was gratitude and obligation rather than pure love? She found herself talking to Mrs. Chen one evening, desperate for someone else's perspective. The older woman listened without interrupting, and when Josephine finished laying out the whole complicated situation, Mrs. Chen poured them both tea and spoke in her practical way. "Let me tell you something about marriage, girl. My husband and I, we barely knew each other when we married. It was arranged by our families back in China. I thought he was ugly and too serious. He thought I talked too much and was too stubborn. But we built a good life together anyway, because we chose to work at it every single day. Love is not just a feeling that happens to you. It is a choice you make, over and over, to care about someone else's happiness as much as your own. But what if I make the wrong choice?" Josephine's voice was small. Mrs. Chen reached across the table and patted her hand. What if you make the right one? You cannot live your whole life being afraid of what might go wrong. That doctor in Philadelphia, he showed you what a bad man looks like. From what you have told me, this cowboy is not that. He is offering you partnership, respect, freedom to be yourself. Most women never get offered that much. His mother is dying. That is why they are pushing this now. Yes, and that is sad and hard, but it does not make the offer less real. If anything, it makes it more precious because they know time is short and they do not want to waste it. Mrs. Chen leaned back, studying Josephine's face. You have already made up your mind, I think. You are just afraid to admit it. Josephine opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Mrs. Chen was right. Deep down, underneath all the fear and self-protection, she had already decided. She just needed to find the courage to follow through. When Owen came back to town exactly 2 weeks later, Josephine was waiting for him on the hotel porch. He dismounted slowly, his face carefully neutral, clearly bracing himself for rejection. She stood up and walked down the steps to meet him in the dusty street. Yes, she said simply. Owen stared at her for a long moment, as if he could not quite believe what he had heard. Yes, yes, I will marry you, but I have conditions. Josephine lifted her chin, needing him to understand. I will not give up nursing. I will not be ordered around or told what I can and cannot do. I will need my own space sometimes, my own thoughts, my own work. And I need you to know that I am not sure yet if what I feel is love or just gratitude and fondness. I need time to figure that out, and I need you to be patient with me. I can do all of that. Owen's voice was rough with emotion. I swear to you, Josephine, I will spend every day earning your trust and your love, however long it takes. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Marfa, with Ruth and Mrs. Chen as witnesses and the circuit preacher performing the service. Josephine wore a new dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, pale blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Owen wore his best clothes, looking uncomfortable but determined in a suit that was slightly too tight across his broad shoulders. As they spoke their vows, Josephine felt a strange calm settle over her. This was not the romantic fairy tale she had imagined as a girl back in Philadelphia. It was something more complicated, built on need and gratitude, and the fragile hope that they might build something real from such uncertain foundations. But when Owen slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and promised to honor and cherish her, she saw nothing but sincerity in his eyes. The ride back to the ranch as Owen's wife felt surreal. Josephine sat beside him on the wagon seat, very aware of her new status, very uncertain of what it would mean. Ruth had stayed behind at the ranch to prepare a celebratory dinner, and for the first time, Josephine and Owen were truly alone together. Thank you, Owen said quietly as they drove through the desert landscape. I know this was not what you came to Texas looking for. No, Josephine agreed. But maybe it is what I needed instead. She glanced at him sideways. I meant what I said about needing time. I am not ready to jump into being a wife in all the ways that might mean. Owen's ears turned red, but his voice stayed steady. I understand. We will take things as slow as you need. I am not going to rush you or push you or expect anything you are not ready to give. True to his word, when they arrived at the ranch, Owen carried her bag to the room that had been his father's study and told her it was hers to use however she wanted. His own room was on the opposite side of the house, and he made it clear without saying it directly that he expected nothing from her except her presence. The relief Josephine felt was profound, and it loosened something tight in her chest that had been clenched since the wedding ceremony. Ruth's health declined through the autumn and into winter. Josephine cared for her with the same dedication she had shown during the infection, but this time there would be no miraculous recovery. The cancer was relentless, eating away at Ruth's strength day by day. Yet even in her illness, Ruth remained the heart of their small household, her sharp wit and loving nature undiminished even as her body failed. "You are good for him," Ruth told Josephine one December afternoon as they sat together in Ruth's room. Outside, snow was falling, rare for this part of Texas and beautiful. "I see the way he looks at you now, like you hung the moon and stars." "I am not sure I have earned that look yet," Josephine said honestly. "I feel like I am still learning how to be a wife." "Marriage is not something you ever finish learning." Ruth's voice was weak but firm. "It is something you work at your whole life, but you are trying, and that is what matters. Owen knows you did not marry him for love. He is not a fool. But he also sees that you care, that you are giving this a real chance, and that is more than enough." "I do care," Josephine said softly. "More than I expected to. He is a good man, Ruth. You raised him well." Ruth smiled, and tears slipped down her gaunt cheeks. "That is all I needed to hear. I can let go now, knowing he will be all right." "Do not talk like that. You are still here, still fighting." "I am tired of fighting, sweetheart. I am ready to rest." Ruth reached out a trembling hand, and Josephine took it gently. "Promise me you will take care of each other. Promise me you will let yourself be happy. You deserve that, both of you." "I promise," Josephine whispered, and knew she meant it. Ruth Anderson died peacefully in her sleep 3 days before Christmas, with both Owen and Josephine at her bedside. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot she had chosen herself years ago when her husband died. The ground was frozen and the digging was hard work, but Owen insisted on doing it himself with help from the ranch hands. Half the county came to the funeral, testimony to how beloved Ruth had been. Josephine watched her husband stand beside his mother's grave with tears streaming down his face, making no effort to hide his grief, and felt her own heart break for him. When the last mourner had left, and the sun was setting in streaks of gold and crimson, she went to him and took his hand. Owen looked down at her with red-rimmed eyes, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her as if she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. They stood there together in the cold until full darkness fell, and when they finally walked back to the house, Josephine knew something fundamental had shifted between them. This was no longer just a marriage of convenience or gratitude. This was two people choosing to stand together against grief and hardship, and whatever else the world might throw at them. The winter was hard in ways that had nothing to do with the weather. Owen threw himself into ranch work with almost frantic energy, as if staying busy enough could keep him from feeling the loss. Josephine continued to see patients when they came to her, but her focus shifted to caring for her husband in small ways he probably did not even notice. She made sure he ate properly. She left him alone when he needed space and stayed close when he needed silent companionship. She learned to read his moods, to understand what his silences meant, to see past his stoic exterior to the pain underneath. And slowly, carefully, they built something new from the ashes of his grief. They began to talk more in the evenings, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Owen told her about growing up on the ranch, about the father he had loved and lost, about the dreams he had for making the ranch prosperous again. Josephine told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her difficult choice to become a nurse over her parents' objections, about the betrayal that had driven her west. "He was a fool," Owen said when she finished the story of Charles. They were sitting by the fire on a cold January night, and his words were fierce with conviction. "Any man who would throw away someone like you for money or social position is worse than a fool. He is a coward." "I thought I loved him," Josephine admitted. "But now I wonder if I just loved the idea of him, the life I thought we would have together. And now," Owen asked quietly. "What do you think about the life we have?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "I think it is nothing like what I imagined I wanted. But I also think it might be better in ways I did not know to dream about." Owen smiled then, one of his rare full smiles that transformed his whole face. "I will take that as a good sign." As winter softened into spring, Josephine found herself falling into the rhythms of ranch life. She had always been a hard worker, but here she discovered muscles she had not known she had. She learned to help with the horses, to tend the kitchen garden, to work alongside the men when they needed extra hands. Owen never expected her to do any of it, never demanded anything beyond what she offered. But Josephine found satisfaction in contributing to their shared life in tangible ways. She also continued her nursing work, and Owen helped her convert one of the outbuildings into a proper clinic, where people from the surrounding ranches could come for treatment. Word spread that the Anderson ranch had a skilled nurse, and Josephine found herself with a steady stream of patients. Owen took pride in her work, never once suggesting that she should give it up or focus solely on being his wife. That trust, that respect for her independence, meant more to Josephine than she knew how to express. One warm evening in April, they were working together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold, and the air smelled of desert sage and possibility. Owen was showing Josephine how to secure the wire properly, his hands covering hers to guide her movements, and suddenly she was intensely aware of his nearness, his warmth, the solid strength of him. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter. "What?" she asked, slightly breathless. "Nothing, just thinking about how lucky I am." His voice was low, intimate in a way that sent shivers down her spine. "Lucky that I am helping you fix fence." Josephine tried for lightness, but her voice came out shaky. "Lucky that you are here at all. That you took a chance on me. That every day I get to come home and find you waiting." Owen reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I know we started this marriage for the wrong reasons, or maybe not wrong, just not the usual ones. But Josephine, somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you. And I do not expect you to say it back or feel the same way. I just needed you to know." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. She had known, on some level, that Owen's feelings had deepened beyond gratitude or companionship. But hearing him say the words out loud, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, broke through the last of her defenses. "I am so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of feeling too much. Afraid of being hurt again. I know, but you do not have to be afraid with me. I would never hurt you, Josephine, not if I can help it. Not ever." Owen's thumb stroked gently across her cheekbone. "And you do not have to say anything you are not ready to say. I just want you to know that you are loved, completely and without reservation." Josephine closed her eyes, feeling tears slip free. "I think I might love you too," she said softly. "I am not sure when it happened. Maybe it started that first night when you trusted me to save your mother's life. Maybe it was watching you grieve for Ruth with such honesty. Maybe it was seeing how you treat the men who work for you with respect, or how you have never once tried to control me or change me. But somewhere along the way, my heart stopped being so afraid and started hoping again." Owen made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then he was pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that made her toes curl. Josephine kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into it, and when they finally pulled apart they were both breathless and laughing. "Does this mean I can move my things into your room?" Owen asked, grinning like a boy despite his 25 years. "I think that can be arranged," Josephine replied primly, but she was grinning too. Though I warn you, I stay up late reading medical journals, and I wake up early to check on patients. I promise to be on my best behavior." Owen kissed her again, slower this time, and Josephine felt the last of her walls crumble. This was real. This was her life now. And for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt truly, completely happy. Their marriage shifted after that evening into something deeper and richer. They shared not just a house but a bed, not just a partnership but genuine intimacy in all its forms. Josephine discovered that loving Owen was nothing like what she had felt for Charles. This was not the shallow attraction of shared social circles and pretty words. This was built on respect and trust, and the daily choice to put each other first. Summer brought new challenges. The drought that had been threatening for years finally settled in with a vengeance. Water sources dried up, grass withered, and cattle prices dropped as everyone tried to sell off herds they could no longer sustain. Owen worked harder than ever, and Josephine saw the worry etched into his face even as he tried to hide it from her. "Talk to me," she said one night as they lay together in the darkness. "I am your wife, Owen. Share your burdens with me." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then his voice came rough with exhaustion and fear. "I do not know if we can keep the ranch. The money is running out. We have already sold off half the herd just to keep going. If the drought continues, if we cannot make enough to pay the bank note that is due in September, we will lose everything my father and mother built." Josephine's mind raced. She had been saving money from her nursing work, keeping it separate out of habit, but they were married now. What was hers was his, and more importantly, they were in this together. "How much do you need?" "Josephine, no, I am not taking your money. It is not my money anymore, it is our money." "How much?" Owen told her the amount, and Josephine did quick calculations. Her savings would not cover all of it, but combined with what they had left from the cattle sale, it would be close. "What if we sold the south pasture?" she asked, thinking out loud. "The land near the creek. It is good property, and Jim Thomas has been wanting to expand his ranch that direction. That land has been in my family for 30 years. Owen's voice was pained. "Land is just land, Owen. We can buy it back someday when times are better. But right now we need to survive, and holding on to everything out of pride is not going to help." Josephine propped herself up on one elbow so she could see his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Your mother told me that you need a partner to run this ranch. Let me be that partner. Let me help you make the hard decisions." Owen stared up at her, and then he pulled her down into a fierce hug. "What did I do to deserve you? You took a chance on a broken-down nurse with a ruined reputation," Josephine replied, her voice muffled against his chest. "And you gave her a reason to believe in second chances. They sold the south pasture to Jim Thomas for a fair price, and combined with Josephine's savings and strict economizing, they managed to make the bank payment with a little left over. It was not easy, and there were times when Josephine saw the pain in Owen's eyes at having to let go of part of his heritage. But they survived, and more than that, they survived together. The drought finally broke in late October with a series of storms that turned the dry creek beds into rushing torrents and brought the desert back to life. By then, Josephine had missed 2 monthly cycles and was starting to suspect what that meant. She waited until she was certain before telling Owen, choosing a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face. Owen went absolutely still, and for a moment Josephine worried that he was not happy about it. Then he turned to her with such joy and wonder in his eyes that she felt tears spring to her own. "Truly, truly. I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come sometime in the spring." Josephine took his hand and placed it on her belly, which was just starting to show the slightest curve. Are you happy? Happy does not even begin to cover it. Owen's voice was thick with emotion. A baby, our baby, I cannot believe it. They told the ranch hands that evening, and the news sparked a celebration that lasted well into the night. These men had become like family over the past year, loyal and hardworking despite the difficult times. They were genuinely thrilled for Owen and Josephine, and their joy helped carry the young couple through the winter as they prepared for the new arrival. Josephine continued to work through her pregnancy, seeing patients and helping around the ranch until Owen finally put his foot down and insisted she rest more. I am not risking you or the baby because you are too stubborn to slow down, he said firmly, and Josephine found she could not argue with the worry in his eyes. The baby, a boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determination, was born on a warm April evening in 1884 with only minor complications. Josephine, drawing on her nursing training, stayed remarkably calm through the whole process, though Owen was a complete mess and had to be sent outside 3 times before the midwife from town took pity on him and let him stay. They named him Russell Owen Anderson, Russell after Owen's father and Owen to carry on the name. Holding their son for the first time, Josephine felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took her breath away. She looked up at Owen, who was staring at the baby with naked adoration on his face, and knew that this was everything she had never let herself dream of. A family, a home, a love that had started from the most unlikely circumstances and grown into something unshakable. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Russell was a good baby, happy and healthy, and he brought laughter back to the ranch in a way nothing else had since Ruth's death. The drought had ended, grass was growing again, and slowly but surely they were able to rebuild the herd and start recovering financially. Josephine's nursing practice continued to grow as well. She had become known throughout the region as someone who could be trusted with the most difficult cases, and people came from as far as 50 miles away to seek her help. Owen built her a larger clinic building, with a room where seriously ill patients could stay for a few days if needed. Josephine trained 2 young women from town to assist her, and together they provided care that the community desperately needed. By the time Russell was walking and getting into everything, Josephine was pregnant again. This time a daughter arrived, born on a cool November morning in 1885. They named her Ruth, after Owen's mother, and when Owen held his daughter for the first time and cried, Josephine understood that this was his way of honoring the woman who had brought them together. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. They bought back the south pasture and added more land. The ranch prospered, and Owen became known as a fair and innovative rancher who treated his workers well and maintained high standards. Josephine's clinic became an institution in the area, a place where anyone could come for help regardless of their ability to pay. In 1888, when Russell was 4 and Ruth was 3, they welcomed another son, this time naming him Daniel after Josephine's father, who had passed away back in Philadelphia. The news of his death had come as a shock, and with it, a letter from Josephine's younger sister explaining that their father had spoken of her often in his final days, proud of the life she had built even if he had been too stubborn to say so while alive. Josephine wept for the reconciliation that would never happen, but Owen held her and reminded her that her father had known in the end that she was strong and capable and doing good in the world. By the time Daniel was old enough to walk, Josephine had built a solid network of trained nurses and midwives throughout the region. She had written several articles for medical journals back east about frontier medicine, and her reputation had spread far beyond Marfa. Occasionally, She received letters from colleagues in Philadelphia, and she was gratified to learn that her former fiancé Charles had been exposed as a fraud and lost his medical license. The vindication came too late to undo the damage he had caused, but Josephine found she did not care anymore. That life, that pain, felt like it had happened to someone else. One evening in the spring of 1890, Josephine and Owen sat on the porch watching their 3 children play in the yard. Russell, now 6, was teaching his younger siblings how to throw a rope, with mixed results and lots of laughter. The sun was setting in its usual spectacular display, and the air was soft and warm with the promise of summer. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked quietly. "Marrying me, I mean. Giving up whatever life you might have had if you had stayed in Philadelphia or gone somewhere else." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "Where is this coming from?" Owen shrugged, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I was just thinking about how we started, how you married me out of gratitude more than love, how my mother pushed you into it because she was dying. I wonder sometimes if you ever feel trapped here, if you ever wish you had made a different choice." Josephine took his hand, threading her fingers through his calloused ones. "Owen Anderson, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I mean that with my whole heart. Yes, we started from an unusual place. Yes, I was not in love with you when we married. But I fell in love with you day by day, moment by moment, through all the small kindnesses and the big gestures and the way you have never once tried to make me into something I am not. You gave me freedom and partnership and respect, and those things helped me learn to trust again, to love again. So no, I have never regretted marrying you, not for a single second." Owen's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. You and the children, you are everything that matters. I love you too." Josephine leaned over and kissed him softly. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. Your mother was right, you know. Sometimes gratitude and need can grow into something beautiful if you give it a chance." "She would have loved to see this," Owen said, gesturing to the children, the thriving ranch, the life they had built. "Loved to see you all happy and settled." "She does see it," Josephine said firmly. "Somewhere, somehow, I believe she knows that her son is happy and her grandchildren are growing up strong and loved. We honored her dying wish, Owen. We took care of each other and we let ourselves be happy. That is the best legacy we could give her." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Ruth called out that she had managed to rope a fence post, and Russell and Daniel cheered for her. The sound of their children's laughter was the sweetest music Josephine had ever heard. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Josephine and Owen lay together in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "Do you remember that first day we met?" Owen asked softly. "When I burst into your clinic in a panic about my mother. Of course I remember. You looked like you had ridden through hell to get there. I had. I was so scared of losing her, of being left alone. And then you came to the ranch and you saved her life, and I thought you were the bravest, most capable person I had ever met." Owen's hand traced gentle patterns on her shoulder. "I think I started falling in love with you that very first night, watching you work through your exhaustion to help a complete stranger." "I was just doing my job," Josephine protested, but she was smiling. "No, you were doing more than that. You were giving us hope when we had none left. You were showing me what real strength looked like. You were teaching me that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances if you are brave enough to take a chance." Owen pulled her closer. "Thank you for taking that chance. Thank you for saying yes even though you were terrified. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for being worth the risk," Josephine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for proving that not all men are like Charles, that some men actually mean it when they promise to cherish and respect their wives. Thank you for giving me a family and a home and a purpose beyond just surviving. They made love then, slowly and tenderly, with the deep intimacy that came from years of partnership and trust. Afterward, as Josephine drifted toward sleep, she thought about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. A scandal in Philadelphia, a desperate journey west, a dying woman and her devoted son, a marriage born of gratitude and necessity that had transformed into something precious and unshakable. Life continued its steady march forward. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Josephine's clinic expanded to include a small hospital wing. She trained more nurses, established protocols for emergency care, and worked with Owen to create a scholarship fund that would help young people from poor families get medical training. It was named the Ruth Anderson Memorial Fund, and it became Owen's way of honoring his mother's belief that everyone deserved access to good care regardless of their circumstances. In 1895, when Russell was 11, he announced that he wanted to be a doctor like his mother. Josephine gently corrected him that she was a nurse, not a doctor, but Russell was adamant. You save people's lives, you fix what is wrong, you make people better. That is what doctors do, and that is what you do, so I want to be a doctor and help people just like you. The pride that swelled in Josephine's heart at those words was almost painful. She and Owen discussed it at length and decided that when Russell was old enough, they would send him east to medical school, something they could now afford thanks to years of careful management and hard work. It would be difficult to have him so far away, but they both agreed that supporting their children's dreams was more important than keeping them close. Ruth, their daughter, showed no interest in medicine but had inherited her grandmother's head for business and her mother's determination. By the time she was 10, she was helping Owen manage the ranch accounts and had ideas for improving efficiency that even the grown men had to admit were smart. Daniel, the youngest, was quieter than his siblings, but had a gift with animals that reminded everyone of his father. The turn of the century came and went, bringing with it changes to the West that sometimes felt jarring. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more commerce, but also changing the character of the frontier. Towns that had been dusty outposts grew into proper cities. The wildness that had defined the region when Josephine first arrived was slowly being tamed. But through all the changes, the Anderson Ranch remained a constant. Owen and Josephine weathered droughts and floods, economic downturns and personal losses, always together and always stronger for it. They buried old friends and welcomed new neighbors. They celebrated their children's successes and comforted them through their failures. They built not just a ranch but a legacy of decency and hard work and care for their community. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Owen surprised Josephine with a trip to San Antonio, their first time away from the ranch together since their marriage. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked the streets like tourists. It felt strange and wonderful to be just the two of them again, without the constant demands of children and ranch and patience. 20 years, Owen marveled as they sat in the hotel room on their last night, looking out at the city lights. Sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Josephine said, leaning against his shoulder. We have lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences in these 20 years. You ever think about what your life might have been like if you had stayed in Philadelphia? If you had never come west? Owen's voice was curious, not worried. Josephine considered it seriously. I think I would have ended up bitter and alone, probably teaching at some girls' school and resenting every moment of it. Coming west was the best decision I ever made, even though it was born from desperation and running away. And marrying me, Owen asked with a hint of his old vulnerability, was the second best decision I ever made. Josephine turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. Owen, you have given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You have been my partner, my lover, my best friend, my greatest supporter. Every single day I thank whatever force in the universe brought us together, even though it started with gratitude instead of love. He had to ask, even after all these years, especially because of that. Josephine kissed him softly. Love that is chosen, that is built day by day through actions and commitment and respect, is so much stronger than love that just happens. What we have is not based on infatuation or convenience. It is based on genuinely knowing each other, seeing each other at our worst and our best, and choosing to stand together anyway. That is the kind of love that lasts. Owen pulled her close, and Josephine felt the familiar comfort of his embrace. She thought about that desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Marfa 21 years ago, broken and hopeless and terrified of the future. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the hard road ahead would lead to joy beyond measure. They returned to the ranch to find their children had thrown them a surprise party, with neighbors from all over the region gathered to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing, and as Josephine watched Owen waltz with their daughter while their sons argued good-naturedly about who got to dance with their mother next, she felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was her life. This was what she and Owen had built from the ashes of grief and the seeds of gratitude. This community, this family, this love that had grown from the most unlikely beginnings into something that sustained them both through every challenge. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more growth. Russell went to medical school in Boston and came home during breaks with stories about the latest advances in medicine. Ruth married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who treated her as an equal partner. Daniel decided to stay on the ranch and work alongside his father, learning everything Owen could teach him about running a successful operation. In 1910, when Josephine was in her early 50s and Owen was 52, they became grandparents for the first time. Ruth's son was healthy and strong, and watching Owen hold his first grandchild with the same tenderness he had shown their own children made Josephine fall in love with him all over again. They sat on the porch that evening, Owen holding the sleeping baby while Ruth rested inside. "Your mother would have loved this," Josephine said softly, "not for the first time over the years." "She knew it was coming," Owen replied. "That is why she pushed us together so hard. She could see what we might build if we gave it a chance. She was a wise woman." Josephine rested her head on Owen's shoulder, careful not to disturb the baby. "I miss her still, even after all these years." "So do I. But I see her in our children, in the way we run this ranch, in the values we have tried to pass on. She is not really gone, not as long as we remember her and honor what she taught us." Owen pressed a kiss to Josephine's hair. "I think she would say we did all right, you and I." "Better than all right," Josephine corrected. "We built something beautiful." As the sun set on another day, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Texas broken and alone, had married a stranger out of gratitude and obligation, and had somehow found the greatest love of her life in the process. The ranch that had once been a place of desperation and dying had become a place of healing and life. The marriage that had started without love had grown into a partnership deeper and stronger than most people ever experienced. The lonely nurse who had fled Philadelphia in disgrace had become a pillar of her community, respected and valued for her skills and her compassion. And the cowboy who had married her out of gratitude. He had learned to love with his whole heart, and in doing so, had taught her to love the same way. Together, they had created not just a family, but a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. More grandchildren arrived over the years. Russell married a fellow doctor and brought his bride back to Texas, where they opened a practice in Marfa that complemented Josephine's clinic. Daniel married a teacher from town, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. Ruth and her husband had 3 more children, and the Anderson family gatherings became legendary for their size and their joy. Through it all, Josephine and Owen remained the steady center around which everything else revolved. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the desert landscape they loved. But their love only deepened with time, becoming as fundamental and unshakable as the earth beneath their feet. On a warm spring evening in 1920, 38 years after they had first married, Josephine and Owen sat on their porch watching the sun set. They were in their 60s now, still healthy and active, but feeling the weight of years in ways they had not when they were young. The ranch was thriving under Daniel's management, with Owen serving more as an advisor than an active foreman. Josephine had finally retired from active nursing, though she still consulted on difficult cases and taught young nurses who sought her out for her expertise. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked, echoing Owen's question from so many years before. "Marrying a woman you did not love, giving up your chance to find a proper romance with someone who could have loved you from the start." Owen turned to her with surprise and then with laughter, deep and genuine. "Josephine, after all these years, you still doubt what we have." "Not doubt it," Josephine clarified. "Just wonder sometimes if you got the better end of the bargain. I came to you with nothing, took your name and your home and your heart and gave you what? A few children and a lot of work." Owen took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after nearly 4 decades together. "You gave me everything. You saved my mother's life, giving me a few more precious months with her. You agreed to marry me even though you were terrified and had every reason not to trust. You built this ranch alongside me, working as hard as any man and never complaining. You brought healing to our community and hope to people who had none. You gave me 3 wonderful children and more grandchildren than I can count. You loved me when I was not sure I was worthy of being loved." His voice grew thick with emotion. "But most importantly, you taught me that love is not something that just happens. It is something you build day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. We built this love together, Josephine. We chose it every single day for 38 years. That is worth more than 100 romantic beginnings." Josephine felt tears stream down her face, the happy kind that came from being so full of love that it overflowed. "I love you, Owen Anderson, more than I have words to express." "I love you too, Josephine. More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." Owen pulled her close, and they sat together in the gathering darkness, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. Years later, when historians wrote about the settlement of West Texas, they mentioned the Anderson Ranch as an example of frontier success. They wrote about Josephine Anderson's pioneering work in rural nursing, and her establishment of the medical training fund that had helped countless young people pursue careers in health care. They noted Owen Anderson's innovations in ranching and his reputation for fair dealing and progressive practices. But what the history books could not capture was the love story at the heart of it all. The desperate young nurse and the grieving cowboy who had come together through the most unlikely circumstances. The marriage born of gratitude that had transformed into something profound and unshakable. The daily choice to love, to support, to stand together against whatever came. Their descendants, spreading across Texas and beyond, carried that legacy forward. They told their children the story of how great-grandmother Josephine had come west with nothing and built an empire of compassion. How great-grandfather Owen had married her out of gratitude and learned to love with a depth that became legendary in the family. They spoke of that first desperate ride across the desert, of Ruth Anderson's dying wish that had brought two lonely people together, of the slow building of trust and affection that had blossomed into enduring love. The ranch remained in the Anderson family for generations, a testament to what Owen and Josephine had built together. The clinic became a hospital and then a regional medical center, always bearing Josephine's name and commitment to accessible care. The scholarship fund continued to help students pursue medical careers, sending ripples of healing out into a world that always needed more compassion. And through it all, the story endured. The tale of how a cowboy married a nurse out of gratitude for saving his mother's life, and how together they learned that the deepest love is not the kind that strikes like lightning, but the kind that grows slowly and steadily, rooted in respect and watered by daily choice, until it becomes as permanent and essential as the earth and sky themselves. On quiet evenings, when the Texas sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of their laughter, the murmur of their conversations, the comfortable silence of two people who had found in each other everything they never knew they needed. Their love story lived on, not just in the memories of their descendants, but in the very fabric of the land they had loved and the community they had served. It was a reminder that sometimes the best love stories do not begin with passion or romance, but with two broken people choosing to stand together and see what they might build. Owen and Josephine Anderson had built something extraordinary, not despite their unusual beginning, but because of it. They had proven that gratitude can transform into love, that duty can deepen into devotion, that two people who start as strangers can become so intertwined that they become one heart beating in two bodies. Their story ended as all stories must, with death coming for first one and then the other, peacefully and surrounded by the family they had created. But their legacy lived on in every life Josephine had saved or improved, in every fair deal Owen had struck, in every grandchild and great-grandchild who inherited their values of hard work and compassion. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. A life well lived, a love well earned, and the knowledge that they had honored the dying wish of the woman who had brought them together by taking care of each other and letting themselves be happy. Ruth Anderson had asked them to build something beautiful from her grief, and they had exceeded her wildest dreams. The cowboy had married the nurse out of gratitude, yes, but he had loved her out of choice, every single day, until that choice became so fundamental that it was simply who he was. And the nurse had learned to trust again, to open her wounded heart, to believe that not all men were like the one who had betrayed her. Together, they had healed each other's deepest wounds and built something that would echo through generations. Their story was the West at its finest, full of hardship and hope, struggle and triumph, death and life, and above all, the transformative power of choosing to love when love is the bravest and hardest choice of all.